Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate Senator Cruz, who actually came on late notice because my flight was canceled yesterday. I don't know what the airlines have against Turning Point, but it's the second straight event where they've said that they canceled the flight. We took a really late flight in, so got in about 5:45 this morning, but wouldn't do that for any other group, but only do that for Turning Point because that's what Turning Point means. And by the way, just a note, these shirts are amazing. I mean, they really are. I guess that, you know, for the donors, we couldn't put socialism as bullshit, but... So, I'm going to start off by today debunking 5 terms that you've heard, I'm sure, frequently on your college campuses or that you are soon going to experience, and then we'll do some Q&A. So we'll go through these more quickly than usual because I think that it's more fun to do the Q&A, honestly. I get bored with myself. So the 5 terms that we're going to go through really quickly are social justice, white privilege, trigger warnings, microaggressions, and safe spaces. So you hear all of these all the time, obviously, if you're on a college campus nowadays, because it's important that you know that you are an inferior person. If you are somebody who believes that achievement matters, if you're somebody who believes that merit should come before diversity, if you're somebody who believes that your work should be rewarded, this makes you inferior. And all of these terms are designed to make you feel inferior and to shut you up. That's what they are for. So we'll start with social justice. Social justice is absolute nonsense. Whenever they spill slogans like social justice at college campuses, what they really mean is that you are not part of a victimized group and therefore you must be treated badly. Social justice is an oxymoron, right? If a guilty person is acquitted because he's the wrong race, then that means that is anti-justice. The thing about justice, the word justice, it doesn't require a modifier. Something is either just or it's unjust. If you murder someone and you go to prison, that is justice. If you murder someone and you don't go to prison because you're the right race, and the jury decides that because you're the right race you ought not go to prison, that's social justice, which means that it's injustice. Well, today hardcore leftists call themselves social justice warriors, and they do this because they believe that individual justice is racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic. Individual justice suggests... Thug Life creator in the room. All right. Individual justice says that we all have to be held accountable for our own actions, but the SJWs say that that's unfair because we're not just individuals, we're members of groups. And America's a terrible, terrible, horrible place. And as a member of a group, you can't be held accountable for your own individual action. Right? Instead, you have to be held accountable as a member of a group. Now, this, as you may notice, is anti-decency. Right? Decency only abides when we judge individuals by what they do, by who they are, by the sorts of things in which they engage. But the left doesn't care about decency. They care about groups. And that's because the left doesn't care about the individual. They only care about the collective. And the left truly believes that individuals are not responsible for their actions because of the evil, cruel, horrible capitalist system, and of course, because of white privilege. See, if it weren't for all of these institutions, like capitalism and white privilege and the Constitution, if it weren't for all of these things, then everybody would act beautifully. See, the Marxist philosophy suggests, and the left is all rooted in Marx, the Marxist philosophy suggests that human beings are perfectible, but they're only perfectible if society is perfect, if utopia has been reached. So if you see somebody commit a crime, it's never because the person did something bad and committed a crime, it's just because society was imperfect, society did something wrong. This is why the left is focused so much on whenever somebody does something terrible, the first thing they do is they investigate where did they go wrong in their childhood. Right? What did we do wrong as a society? When some terrible event takes place, it's always, what did we do wrong? When a terrorist attack happens, it's, why is American society so Islamophobic? Right? If we were just a little bit less Islamophobic, that never would have happened. If there's a school shooting, it's never, why is this crazy person shooting up a school? It's, why is America such a place where guns are available freely? It's always society's fault, because the goal of the left is to tear down the existing society and replace it with a society that they like better. So every bad incident is evidence that the system itself is bad, and therefore the system has to be wrecked and replaced. And part of this is their desire for ripping down white privilege. So, you know, when they talk about white privilege, the idea here is that because different groups in the United States statistically finish in different places, because blacks have lower income than whites, or because blacks have higher crime rates than whites, because of that, that must be because of white privilege. White privilege is a wonderful thing. It makes people feel better about the fact that these inequalities exist. For the left, inequality equals inequity. If there are two people in a room, and one person has more money and one person has less money, it must be the person with more money screwed the person with less money. This is why the left cares about income inequality. Well, in racial terms, If the left sees that one racial group is doing better than another racial group, it must be because one racial group obviously victimized or is continuing to victimize the other racial group. And this is a really seductive idea, because it means that if you fail at something and you happen to be one of these victim groups, a member of one of these victim groups, then you get to blame that on society. It's never your fault. It's society's fault. And that means, of course, the only true bad guys left in the world are white, heterosexual, cisgender males. Right? The system was built to benefit those white, heterosexual, cisgender males. And this makes people on campus feel strong, and it makes them feel empowered. If you're ever on campus and you hear people spit the term white privilege, like a lizard just spitting out venom at people, you notice that it's something that makes them feel good to say. When you say white privilege, when they say white privilege, it makes them feel better about themselves, and it inherently degrades you. White privilege is an insult. It's not an argument. Now, first of all, I think it's important to actually say a caveat here, and that is, of course in America there's been historic discrimination against black people. Of course that's true. There's Jim Crow, there was slavery. Of course there's been discrimination against lots of groups in America. There's been discrimination against gays and women and Jews. There's been lots of discrimination in America. That does not mean that today white privilege is what governs America. That does not mean that today institutional racism is the cause of inequality in the United States. And the solution to historic injustice is not current day injustice. If something bad happened 50 years ago, the solution isn't, okay, how do we victimize someone else today in order to rectify that scenario? There are no makeup calls. If you're a sports fan, there are no makeup calls when it comes to politics. It's not, okay, something bad happened to my grandparents, and now the way to make that up to me is to take something away from the grandchild of the person who victimized me. You don't get to do that. That is individually unjust. And it is also just untrue that in America, the great obstacle to success is white privilege, is white people. That's just not true. It's a lie. The truth is that in a free country like the United States, the reason that some people succeed and some people fail is because some people make better decisions than other people. Next time people say, why is it that people can't get ahead in America? The answer should be what the Brookings Institute, a left-leaning institute, says. If you want to get ahead in America, if you don't want to be permanently poor in the United States of America, all you have to do is follow 3 rules. Finish high school, get a job, get married before you have babies. That's it. And these things are related to your income. They are related to your success level. Much more correlated, by the way, than your race. So, for example, when it comes to single motherhood, the fact is that the poverty rate among white single mothers is 22%. The poverty rate among black 2-parent families is 7%. What happened to the white privilege? Did it just disappear? Why isn't it that the black families have sure, they have 2 parents, but they're black still, so you would assume that if white privilege governed, they would be poorer than the white single mother. They're not. The single greatest indicator of intergenerational poverty for all races is single motherhood. And that's just a fact, but people don't want to talk about it because it's easier to just blame it on society. Here's another one. How about the not committing crimes privilege? Right? If you're deeply worried about the evil, horrible criminal justice system, which is throwing too many black people in prison, there's an easy solution. Don't commit crimes. The fact is that there's a study, 1994, from the DOJ, in the country's 75 largest urban areas, there's lower felony prosecution rates for blacks than whites. And the idea that the police are out there targeting black people to shoot them or kill them is just not true, statistically speaking. There's a study just a few months ago from Roland Fryer, who's a black professor at Harvard, and he found that it's actually statistically more likely that you're going to be shot if you're a white suspect in a similar situation than if you're a black suspect in a similar situation. In 2015, the DOJ analyzed the Philly Police Department, found white officers were actually less likely than black or Hispanic officers to shoot unarmed black suspects. Why? We see why. The blowback is horrible when it's a white officer who shoots a black suspect. It's not the same blowback when it's a person of color shooting a person of color. How about the white privilege of stop and frisk? You hear this one all the time, right? Bill de Blasio, the communist moron who runs New York, right? He said that stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is an example of white privilege, except for the fact that it's not. From January to June 2008, 95% of all gun assailants in the city of New York were black or Hispanic. 85% of the people pulled over in stop and frisk, only 85% were black or Hispanic. It was actually statistically under-targeting minorities. Okay, how about sentencing disparities? You hear this one on campus a lot, right? The system is biased because you get a different sentence for an ounce of powder cocaine than you get for an ounce of crack cocaine. Except for the fact that it was black legislators in the inner cities who wanted those disparities in sentencing because they were sick of watching crack ravage their communities. And by the way, if you actually want a comparable, then what you should actually do is compare an ounce of crack cocaine to an ounce of crystal meth. Crystal meth is a largely white people drug. Crack cocaine is largely a black people drug in terms of who's arrested for it. And the sentence is exactly the same under federal law. It's 5 years for an ounce of crystal meth possession. It's 5 years for an ounce of crack cocaine possession. But here's the beautiful thing about white privilege. No matter what happens, you always get to claim it. So when black police officers get in an altercation with a black suspect in Baltimore, and the suspect dies, and the majority of the city council is black, and the mayor is black, and the attorney, the city attorney is black, and the district attorney is black, and the attorney general of the United States is black, and the president of the United States is black. That's all happening because of white privilege. Right? Black people are rioting because of white privilege in that situation. When you can blame white privilege, it means you never have to take personal responsibility. And look, it doesn't even make sense in any case, because the fact is that whites aren't even the racial group that does best in the United States by income. By household income, the group that does the best in the United States is Asian folks. But nobody ever talks about nefarious Asian privilege. You know, the fact that the founders designed the system in order to benefit Asian people, which is why they do so well. I mean, clearly they did. I mean, that's why the Constitution is written in Korean. White privilege is just a way to avoid individual responsibility, and individual responsibility is the only thing that as a society we should care about. Well, what happens when the left can't actually come up with their equal society by simply shouting white privilege over and over? When it turns out that no matter how much you shout about society, equality is never achieved, because in order for equality to be achieved, people have to be equally good, and they're never going to be equally good. People are never going to take equally beneficial measures. People aren't born equal in terms of ability. They're born equal in terms of rights. Is it interesting, conservatives and leftists? Right? Conservatives understand we are born equal in terms of rights. We are all made in God's image, and therefore we all have equal rights under the law. Leftists believe that we are all born equal in ability, which obviously is untrue. Right? And clearly, I'm not somebody who's going to be playing in the NBA anytime soon. Right? We all have different abilities. But that doesn't mean that the decisions that we make don't have an impact on where we end up, because the fact is good decisions made by anyone are likely to leave you better off than bad decisions made by those same people. So what if once the inequality isn't achieved, the left has to come up with some other gauge for equality, because they're never able to achieve equality without gulagging 80 million people and killing half of them. Right? They're never able to achieve their form of equality without tremendous human suffering. So what do they do instead? Well, in the United States, they talk about equality of feelings. Right? My favorite thing, feelings. They talk about how much feelings matter, right? It's not important that we all be equal in terms of outcome. What is deeply, deeply important, obviously, is that we be equal in terms of how we feel about ourselves. We all have to feel very, very special and warm and fuzzy on the inside. And that's why we have to have things like trigger warnings that might offend you. Something that might confront you with an idea different than your own, you have to be given a trigger warning, because who knows, you could go crazy. It could be too much for you. You know, the two security guys I work with, both of them served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and somehow they don't need trigger warnings, right? They didn't get trigger warnings when they were in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they're perfectly functional human beings, and they're American heroes because they don't need trigger warnings when people are actually shooting at them. Hey, You being in a classroom does not require a trigger warning, or you're a weakling who shouldn't be in a classroom in the first place. And here's the thing about the trigger warnings. Obviously, they only work in one direction, right? You need a trigger warning if you're on the left. There's no trigger warning if you're on the right. So if some professor asks you to stand up because you voted for Trump so they can single you out, that doesn't require a trigger warning. But if you're in class and you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, that requires trigger warnings. And the reason for that is because if you're on the right, then you're obviously guilty, right? You're a member of this class, this group of powerful people, and you don't ever need trigger warnings, and you can be routinely aggressed, right? Because you're the purveyor of microaggressions. So this brings us to our next term, microaggression. So the term microaggressions is in and of itself really evil. And it's not just bad, it's evil. Because the idea here is not just you're saying something offensive, it's that I have aggressed you. Microaggression, right? And the proper response to aggression is you get to hit me. If I were to hit you, you'd get to hit me back. If I were to aggress you, you get to aggress me back. And the left truly sees it this way. Microaggressions are a form of violence, and they talk this way. They say that words are a form of violence. They equate words and violence, which is the end of civilization, by the way. The minute that you equate words and violence, civilization is over. Because if we can't say anything to each other without engaging in violence, we can't live in society together. And the things that they use as examples of microaggression are so asinine, things that require them to find their safe spaces with their Play-Doh and their finger paints. Things like I'm colorblind. If you say I'm colorblind to someone, this is a microaggression. If you say he or she, that's a microaggression because that's cisnormative. Right? You have to use made-up terms like Z that don't even mean anything, and no one knows where it came from or why it is. Right? If you say, where are you from? This is legitimately, they call this a microaggression. If you say, where are you from? Which doesn't, because you might be, maybe I perceive you as a foreigner, and you're taking that as some sort of insult. I mean, every time I've asked somebody where they're from, it's typically because I assume they weren't born right here where we're talking. But for the left, that's a microaggression. And obviously, if you say something factual politically, that too is a microaggression, and that's to be met with violence. Microaggressions are to be met with violence. So my own personal example of this happening happened. How many of you here have watched at any point CNN headline news? Show of hands. CNN headline news. That's the entire audience for CNN headline news. So I was asked to, about a year and a half ago now, probably 18 months ago, Caitlyn Jenner was the hot topic of the day, and CNN headline news asked me to come in and talk about the Caitlyn Jenner thing because ESPN was giving Caitlyn Jenner the Hero of the Year award. Now, my own perspective on transgenderism, I've made this very clear many times, is that I believe transgenderism is a grave and tragic mental disorder, and it is cruelty to people with a mental disorder to suggest that their delusions are reality. It's cruel to them because it forbids you from actually finding solutions for people that work. Transgender surgery is not something that has a good body of social science suggesting that it works, and I'm much more in favor of scientific solutions, or at least searching for them, than I am in favor of nostrums, where you just pretend that men are women and women are men in completely ascientific manner. That's nonsense. And by the way, it teaches young children that gender confusion is something normal as opposed to something that we ought to attempt to deal with. And the fact is also, by the way, most kids, just statistically speaking, most kids who think that they are transgender grow out of it. 80% of kids who think they're transgender grow out of it by statistical analysis. So that's my perspective on transgenderism. So they call me in, and so they call me in, and they honestly, I think what they did is they just looked in the white pages for conservative, and I'm the only one in a 30-mile radius of CNN in LA. And so I go in, and the producer turns to me and says, you know, we have no ratings here at CNN Headline News. And I said, right, I know. And producer says, we really want you to just speak your mind, say what you think. And I said, we came to the right place. And they said, I used to produce for Jerry Springer. And it was at this point I should have had second thoughts, but I did not. So they bring me into the set, and it's Dr. Drew's show. And so on the panel is Dr. Drew and Psycho Mike and this blonde gal, I don't remember her name, and then next to me there are 3 people also. So it's me against 6 lefties, which makes it almost fair for them. So we're So we start this debate, and the entire debate is Caitlyn, and this is not making fun of Caitlyn Jenner. This is making fun of the media that covers Caitlyn Jenner. The entire debate was, is Caitlyn Jenner a hero or the greatest hero? Is Caitlyn Jenner somebody who is as heroic as the people who stormed the beaches at Normandy, or is Caitlyn Jenner even more heroic than that? Right? Is it like paratrooper heroism or Air Force heroism? Like this is the argument, and so they go through this whole thing, and it's just a question of how heroic is Caitlyn Jenner. And finally, they come to me, and I say, I don't understand they say, do you think Caitlyn Jenner deserves this award? And I said, well, for what? Caitlyn Jenner is somebody with a mental disorder who had some surgeries, and I feel terrible for Caitlyn Jenner. Where's the heroism exactly? And so Dr. Drew starts trying to press it. So the person sitting next to me, I neglected to mention this, is a fellow named Zoe Tur. And Zoe is a transgender woman. So Zoe used to be Bob Tur, was the helicopter pilot actually during the O.J. Simpson chase. That's how Bob Tur made his name, and now he's Zoe Tur. So Zoe's sitting next to me and getting very uptight with me saying these things about genetics and science. And so Zoe turns to me and says, you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. I said, well, I know enough about genetics to know that every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body has a Y chromosome in it, with the exception, ironically, of some of Caitlyn Jenner's sperm cells. And Zoe just keeps saying, yeah, you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. And so finally I turned to Zoe and I said, well, what are your genetics, sir? And it was And honestly, it wasn't meant as a dig. It's because Zoe Tur is a genetic man, and I treat men as men. The whole debate is about whether men are men or men are women, obviously. So I say that, and Zoe reaches over and grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV and says, if you don't cut that out, I'll send you home in an ambulance. This is on live national TV. And honest to God, my first thought was that doesn't even make any sense. You don't go home in an ambulance. But But what I said was, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political conversation. Well, the punchline of this is that everybody who's there, all 6 people, immediately turn, the other 5 except for Zoe, the other 5 turn and immediately say, Ben, how could you have said that? You knew that that was going to make Zoe so upset. You did that. That was deliberately offensive. How could you have been offensive to the pronouns, as one woman put it, and that's when I said facts don't care about your feelings. But the fact is, but the idea was I deserved to be met with actual physical aggression on live national TV for saying sir to a genetic man. And by the way, the aggression didn't stop after that. As Zoe went hulking off the set, Zoe turns to me and says to me and growls at me in a voice an octave lower than my own, "I'll see you in the parking lot." And security had to escort me out to my car. Bizarre evening. And then later on Twitter, Zoe threatened to curb stomp me, all of which I thought was just deeply unladylike behavior. But again, the idea is that microaggressions are something that have to be met with aggression, and that's why they say it on campus, because the idea is if you say something you don't even know is offensive, but is taken as offensive, people get to hurt you. And then finally, once you've had all the trigger warnings and all the microaggressions have been policed, you finally end up with your idiotic safe space. Right? The safe space where no one gets to talk, your own little bubble of happiness, which doesn't exist in the real world. Because you're going to graduate college, all these idiots are going to graduate college and infect our workplaces, and they're going to go there and expect that no one is ever going to say anything with which they disagree. Or they're going to the political world, and nobody will ever say anything that offends them in any way. Now, those of us on the right understand that you're going to be offended every 5 seconds in politics. If you're politically active, someone will say something offensive to you almost literally every 5 seconds. There will be something that you disagree with, something that you think is stupid, something that you, and the good part of that is that you have to learn how to counter that. You have to learn how to respond to that. You have to learn how to be a bigger person, or you have to learn you have to learn knowledge. You have to have a knowledge base to refute all these things. But if you're in a safe space, then it's sort of like the kids who were very wealthy during the 1930s, during the polio epidemic. It actually makes you more susceptible to polio, because if you never actually deal with germs, and then all of a sudden you hit all the germs at once, you get polio. And that's what it is for all these kids. These kids go to college campuses, they live in their safe spaces, and then when they leave, they are not equipped in any way to deal with actual real conversation. And so their solution is a bigger government that can still continue to promote this kind of fake society that doesn't really exist. And this is making a generation of leftists who are just nuts. I mean, just crazy. You know, people who suggest at University of Missouri that they have to have a protest space that is all black. Right? This is what happened at University of Missouri. Or they have to have separate black housing. This is happening now. It happened at USC. I think it's happening at University of Missouri also. Separate black housing, to which the KKK says, absolutely, let's do that. It also creates people who are aggressive. If you have a perception of the world that every time somebody says something to you, it's because they're attempting to hurt you, and you get to be aggressive in response, it makes you more aggressive. Which is why it's very funny. You see the left keep promoting these hoax stories about Trump supporters randomly attacking lefties. But the fact is that every time I speak on a campus, there's a near riot, apparently. And that's not really because of anything that I'm saying. I think that it's more because there's just someone on campus who disagrees with them, and that cannot be tolerated in any way. And that's extending over the course of the United States. There's a November 2015 Pew poll found 40% of millennials 18 to 34 thought that the government should prevent people from making statements offensive to minority groups, which involves repeal of the First Amendment. I mean, it's a stunning statistic. Here's the thing. America is the greatest place on the planet. Everybody has a shot at victory here. We do. And nobody cares enough to stop anybody. Right? The idea that we are all sitting in this room plotting how to stop lefties or stop black people from succeeding in life, we don't care enough about anybody to do that, because nobody cares that much about us. This is the beautiful thing about living in a society where you care about your family and your friends and your community, but you're not sitting around nefariously plotting to keep other people down. And one of the great things about being a leftist is you think that the entire universe is focused in on you, but the universe doesn't care about you. Right? None of us are sitting around, like in your off hours, are you sitting around thinking how to keep that sophomore co-ed from succeeding at her job? Like, no one is doing that. But if you can create this system in your mind where everyone's preventing you, then you get to blame the rest of society. So people need to buck up a little bit, and it's incumbent on us to speak the truth about this, and that's sometimes going to be offensive. Sometimes it means that your feelings are not justified. When I say facts don't care about your feelings, I'm not trying to be callous, although frankly I don't care that much. But what I'm really saying is that when you value feelings over facts, you actually end up hurting more people. When you value feelings over facts, you end up destroying the system. And when you value feelings over behavior, you end up justifying some really bad behavior. So it's incumbent on all of us to go out there and preach decency and be decent. Now, when I say preach decency and be decent, I don't mean in response to people who are indecent. Indecency does not call for a decent response. Indecency should be met by punching back twice as hard. But it is our responsibility to go out there and preach decent behavior and be better people, preach better ideas. If we do that, we will succeed. And I know that's what all of you are involved in doing here at Turning Point. One of the things I love about speaking at Turning Point is usually when I come down to Palm Beach to speak at an event, the average age is somewhere between 70 and death. And when I come to Turning Point, I'm the oldest person in the room, which is really cool and gives, I think, a lot of people hope for the future. So thank you for what you do, and happy to take questions. Sure.
First off, I wanted to say that it's really nice to actually enjoy one of your lectures without the obnoxious posse of social justice warriors to follow you.
Let's be honest, everybody was sort of hoping the lefties would crash so I could just insult them. I could do my insult comic routine, yeah.
So I'm actually interested in going into political media, going into radio, doing stuff much like what you do. Do you have any tips for how I should go about that?
Yes. So the first thing is you have to do a lot of stuff for free. So when I first started in this business, you have to write for free, don't expect to be paid, and get your foot in the door. And places like Daily Wire take submissions. The other thing is that everybody's got an opinion, but not everybody has a unique set of facts, meaning that if you can do investigative journalism, as Andrew Breitbart used to put it, if you got a cell phone, you're now a journalist. So you should be on the lookout, particularly if on campus. There's going to be stuff on your campus every day that's newsworthy. You send it to people like me at Daily Wire, we'll put it up, and then we'll get it to Megyn Kelly, and she'll put you on. So that's the kind of way that you actually start gaining credibility. The other thing is just never stop reading. I mean, just incessantly read. I read still. I lead a pretty busy life. I still read 3 to 4 books a week. So So every opportunity you have, you should be reading. And I'm happy to. We're putting up a book list at Daily Wire, kind of my recommendations for different topic areas. But the number one book I always recommend for people who haven't read it, you should go read, and it's a very easy read. It's like 150 pages. You can read it in a few hours. Is Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. If you haven't read that book, you should go read it right away. So knowledge, work for free, and be a reporter. Get news. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
There is a however here, and it's just I need you to clarify or give me the
sure.
argument. So recently on the Rubin Report, the second time you were on,
yes,
you promoted the notion that Trump's appeal to dominantly blue-collar states was actually a racially charged appeal to dominantly white blue-collar states, who Trump thought could be an influence into like tribal behavior.
That's a little bit of a misstatement, but yeah, that's fine.
But I just want you exactly. I just want you.
Yeah, sure. So
I'm from Ohio. My dad's white collar.
Yes.
I moved into white collar. My neighbors are black and did the exact same things and voted for Trump. So I just want to make sure that we're not defending something that's.
Yeah, so what I said on Rubin Report is that what I have seen in this election cycle is a rise of tribalism on all sides. That doesn't mean that everybody in blue-collar states who voted for Trump is a tribalist in voting for Trump because he's white or because he's promoting white interests. What I was saying is that there were times during the campaign when Trump was making an overtly tribal appeal. That was not always, but he was doing it. I mean, when he was going on Jake Tapper and not denouncing the KKK 2 days before the Louisiana primary, I didn't see that as something that I looked kindly upon. Right? When Donald Trump was basically going easy on the alt-right, I don't think he's ignorant. I don't think he's stupid. That troubled me. Does that mean that all the people what the left is mixing up is that critique of Trump's campaign with the idea that everyone who voted for him is a member of these groups, which of course is not true. The vast majority of people who voted for Donald Trump are people I know, people I like, right? People who are voting for him because, mainly I think to be fair, I think mainly people were voting for him because they hate Hillary Clinton. But it's which is entirely justified. But the idea that his campaign was utterly free of this kind of politicking to a small group of people, that's obviously untrue. And one of the things that I've taken a lot of flack for in this particular election cycle is trying to be honest, I think, about the various candidates. I don't see politics as team sport. I really don't. I think that the minute you start seeing politics as team sport, you're not talking about what's right and wrong anymore, or good or bad. You're simply talking about who you like and who you don't. And so I have a very simple test for everybody in this room, and you should keep this going for the next 4 years, and that is put the shoe on the other foot and see if it's something you would be okay with if Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton were doing it. Because I am more than happy to celebrate Donald Trump when he does things that are good. I mean, I do a whole segment on my show called Good Trump, Bad Trump, and every so often he gets an excellent Trump. Yeah, exactly, singing the song over here. But I think that it is imperative that we not get sucked into the maw of simple partisanship where just because Trump says something's good, like the carrier deal, suddenly it becomes good in and of itself. I think that's a huge mistake, and I think that's a good way to lose all of your political principles. There's a perfectly good argument that people should have voted for Trump to stop Hillary. That's a perfectly valid argument. There is no good argument for the idea that you should go along with bad ideas just because they help Trump. Because you are not loyal to Trump. It is not your job to be loyal to Trump. It is Trump's job to work for you. He is your servant, not the other way around.
Thank you for coming. In the last presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, there's a few nobodies. Who did you vote for?
I didn't vote at the top of the ticket. I didn't. And the reason that I didn't vote at the top of the ticket is because there are two ways of viewing your vote. Way one of viewing your vote is that your vote is a coupon that expires November 9th. That if you don't vote, then your vote was meaningless anyway, so who really cares? That's one way of viewing your vote. So you do the lesser of two evils. Trump was the lesser of two evils. By the way, I agree that for the next 4 years, Trump was the lesser of two evils. That was an argument with which I actually agree. The other way of viewing your vote is that it is a sign of moral approval of the person for whom you are voting. And especially for somebody like me in public life commenting about this stuff regularly, clearly the only reason people care about whom I voted is because they see my vote that way. I live in California. My vote didn't make one damn bit of difference. But the reason the reason people kept asking me, how are you voting, is because what they were looking for was for me to say my stamp of moral approval is on Donald Trump. And it wasn't. I'm sorry. So I hope he proves me wrong. I hope that he ends up being the most wonderful president that God ever created. I hope he turns out to be a much better person than he evidenced during this election cycle. I hope that he proves me wrong on every level. I really do, because for the sake of the country, I hope he does that. But I think that it was incumbent on me, particularly as somebody who does this every day, to call out what I saw was wrong and also suggest what I thought was right during the campaign. For example, I said that I thought his speech on race was excellent. I thought his speech on ISIS was excellent. But I thought that some of the things that he was saying were obviously things that Republicans have not historically been in favor of. That's how. So I didn't vote at the top of the ticket. He could earn my vote for re-election, but he's going to have to earn it. It's his job to earn my vote. I don't owe my vote to him.
So let me just say, your podcast has made me a smarter and more objective person. I do agree that there is no institutional white privilege, but as the child of immigrants who followed a very different culture and living in a community with a lot of white people, and minorities, I noticed that there was a strong sort of division in whether I go with the white community's culture and my social aspect, I guess, at school and with friends is improved, or I stay loyal to my parents and obviously my relation with them is improved.
Sure.
And this is a track I've seen with many people. I'm Indian, many Indians, and people of other races in my hometown, in my college, etc. So don't you agree that there is some privilege to being sort of culturally homogenous with the rest of your community?
Well, it depends on whether so the question is, when you say culturally homogenous with the rest of your community, I don't think that, look, I think that you're going to have more friends if you keep the same holidays as everybody else. Okay, but that's not the same thing as they're going to stop you if you don't keep the same holidays as everybody else. So the point that I'm making is that if you make a good decision as a person of Indian descent, you are going to be rewarded similarly to a white person who makes those same decisions. Right? But when I talk about institutional racism or white privilege, I'm not talking about the social aspect of things. We all choose who our friends are. We all choose our behaviors. First of all, to say that the white community is homogenous is not even true either, right? I mean, Jews were part of the white community. They weren't part of the white community. Depends on who you ask on which day. But America's an insanely tolerant place for people of different cultures, but there is a common standard of behavior. And all I've been saying is that if you fulfill that common standard of behavior, nobody is going to stand in your way and prevent you from achieving success. But I mean, look, your friends are your own, and you make the choice as to who your friends are going to be. Other people have the same right to do so.
of different speakers on campuses, but I think by far you're the most substantive, principled individual on campus.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Your check is in the mail.
Honestly, I really put you along with Ted Cruz and my favorite, Mark Levin.
I'm hosting a show on Wednesday, by the way, so that should be fun.
Well, then here's my question. Would you consider Mark Levin's new platform of conservative review and conservative review TV? I think you would be able to expand even more.
We have a very good working partnership with Conservative Review and CRTV, and we're more than happy to work with them. And to be frank with you, we talk with them a lot. So it's not like I've never seen. This is actually something that's important for the whole conservative community. So it's not just parochial inside business talk. Everybody sort of tends to see the conservative movement as a fixed pie, and we're all competing with each other. And I've never seen it that way. You can visit Conservative Review. You can also visit Daily Wire. I encourage people to subscribe to Conservative Review, and I encourage people to operate within all of these various groups.
Well, thank you, and I needed something to get rid of Breitbart in the alt-right. So.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you, Ben. I'm from UCLA, so.
Oh, okay. Yep. How are you doing?
Good. So I have a question that was more kind of policy. I see the UN as kind of a globalist, overreaching, redefining
Yes.
organization. Just the whole state of Jerusalem, not defining it as part of Jewish history.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was, what do you think the U.S.'s involvement with the UN should be in?
I think the UN is disgusting. We should disband it. So this is actually an excellent opportunity to explain what globalist means, because people have been misusing this all the way through this campaign. Okay, globalist does not mean that you're allowed to trade with people you want to trade with. Globalist means that you think that foreign authorities should govern American life. Right? That's what globalist means. Globalist means that you think that international law should govern inside the United States, or that the international community should decide what's good for us, and that's a bunch of crap. But that has nothing to do with free trade. Free trade is the idea that I should be able to trade with whom I want as an individual. And so people have been saying globalist when you say, okay, I want to sign a trade agreement with China, for example, that will allow both of us to trade in mutually beneficial agreements. That is not the UN sitting there telling Americans what is good for them. It's the United States government getting out of the way of me doing business with people with whom I want to do business. So the easiest free trade agreements, that you really shouldn't need 1,000-page free trade agreements. Free trade agreements should be, I agree to trade with you. Right? That's all. But as far as the UN, there are certain. This is not to argue against international institutions. It's to argue against the moral authority of an international institution that puts Sudan on the Human Rights Commission. Right? The idea that all nations should have an equal say in how things go, including despotisms, that's silliness, and that's the basic idea of the UN, and that's why they consistently are siding with the world's worst human beings.
Hi, Ben. Well, thank you for getting here. Glad you could.
Yeah.
I actually was, as you said before, the single biggest indicator of poverty was single motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
How do you
Intergenerational poverty, yeah.
Well, how do you respond to a leftist who says, oh, well, if you wouldn't be willing to adopt a child of a single mother, how can you be pro-life? Because I'm 20 years old,
Yeah.
I can't adopt a kid.
Okay, so first of all, it's a ridiculously stupid argument, because it's essentially saying, unless you are going to adopt this prospective murder victim, you cannot be against murder laws. Right? These are two unrelated questions. Right? Unless you're in favor of Medicaid, you can't be in favor of laws that punish murderers. Right? I can want the child not to be murdered, and also say that the mother has a responsibility to take care of the child. Right? As a parent of two, the only thing that I get up in the morning thinking about is how do I provide for my children today? And the idea that anybody else would have a different priority is asinine and morally disgusting. So that's a way of avoiding the argument. It's like saying, you don't want to see that, but you don't want to see that guy shoot that puppy in the head, you better adopt that puppy. It's like, no, I can also say that the guy just shouldn't shoot the puppy in the head. Right? Like the fact is that the moral issue of killing an unborn human being is not the same issue as how you take care of that unborn human being after. And there's a very solid argument to be made that a lot of the social programs that are designed to care for children actually incentivize parents not to take care of children by living in single-parent homes, for example, as the welfare system incentivizes people to do. But again, this idea that you can't be against something horrible. That's like saying you can't be against genocide against Syrian refugees unless you are willing to take the Syrian refugee into your home. No, I can be against both of those things, right? I can say that we should not allow people to murder Syrian refugees, and also I don't actually have to add a fifth bedroom on my house. And it's silly.
Hi, Ben Shapiro. I'm Alexis. I'm the president of Room Republicans at UCLA.
Oh, cool. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank you for being here and, of course, extend an offer to speak at our campus. We'd love to have you at your home.
Oh, yeah, more than happy to speak there.
Thank you.
I'm not sure everybody else will be, but sure.
With you and explore all of the protesters. And then my question is, how exactly do you feel about President-elect Trump's his picks for his cabinet?
I think his cabinet picks have been largely very good. So what'll be interesting to see is sort of looking at how Trump has. There are two ways of gauging Trump so far as president-elect, and he hasn't really done anything yet because he's not the president yet. There's two ways of gauging how he's done. One is his cabinet picks, and the other is the stuff that he does that's not his cabinet picks. Right? And you sort of have to determine which is more indicative of how he's going to govern. Is it going to be more like the stuff that he does with Carrier and the stuff that he says on Twitter, or is it more like him picking Scott Pruitt for the EPA? So both can be true, by the way. You can say that the Scott Pruitt pick for the EPA is a wonderful pick and is going to absolutely unleash industry and get rid of a lot of bad regulations, and that the soft regulatory background of the Trump administration is likely to be very good because he's appointed a lot of very good people. And I totally agree with that. And then you can also say that when Trump intervenes, he's sort of like, he's sort of like Jack Horner in the corner sticking his thumb in the pie. Every so often, he's going to just intervene in things and wreck them. And so that's what I see from Twitter, and that's what I see from the Carrier deal, but maybe he won't do that. So the way I've gauged it so far is that his cabinet picks are like 80-20 really good. I think the Tillerson pick is not good for Secretary of State. I think Tillerson is, there's only one reason Trump picked Tillerson, and it's because of his closeness with Putin. It really is the only reason he picked him, because the fact is, it was not people who say, well, he's a great businessman. I agree, he is a great businessman. But the task was not pick the best CEO of Exxon you can find. It was pick the best person to handle foreign policy, right? And so there's only one reason. I mean, he said it in one of his speeches, that it's his relationships with foreign leaders that he likes the best. Well, the relationships with foreign leaders that Tillerson is the strongest with are Arab leaders in oil-rich countries and with Putin. So that's not something that I like. But Sessions for AG is really good. The Mattis, obviously, for SecDef is terrific. So as I say, I have my quibbles with, I think Betsy DeVos is fine for Secretary of Education. I have no idea why Ben Carson is qualified for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, other than the very awkward position where he's black. But it's not to be politically incorrect, but I'm going to be politically incorrect. Okay, Ben Carson got picked for that position because he once lived in a house in a city and is black. I mean, Surgeon General would have been a great position for Ben Carson. Housing and Urban Development, I'm not sure, but it's. And then the other side of Trump is the Carrier deal and all that, and I think the Carrier deal is astonishingly bad. If he intervenes in the economy that way, that's not something I'm happy with.
You mentioned earlier that Jews, Mika from Florida State, you mentioned earlier that Jews have been grouped into this white privilege. As a Jew living on,
As soon as we became economically successful, yeah.
a study just came out saying that last year the group that was targeted for most of the hate crimes in America was in fact Jews.
That's been true for decades, yeah.
So how do we, disconnect from this, correlation to white privilege? Because for many Jews around the country, it does not exist.
Well, first of all, I don't think white privilege exists, period. So there's that. As far as the kind of Jewish connection to white privilege, again, I think that there's a need for the left, because the left says they speak on behalf of victimized groups. When those groups are no longer victimized, they say they're no longer a minority group. Right? It's the same reason they say that Clarence Thomas is not a real black person. If you speak on behalf of all the black people, and then Clarence Thomas says, well, you don't speak on my behalf, then one of two things is true. Either you don't speak for all the black people, or Clarence Thomas isn't black. And so this is the way the left gets around this, is by saying, well, Jews are really white people. They're not a minority group anymore. Right? Clarence Thomas isn't really black. He's a white guy who looks black. Right? That's sort of how, and that's how the left gets around this logical conundrum they've created for themselves.
Hi. So I kind of have like a two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
One is about how the Daily Wire is going to deal with fake news now that. So Facebook is everybody knows that Facebook is allowing now other people to say what's fake, what's real.
Yeah.
How is the Daily Wire going to deal with that? And
Mm-hmm.
what do you recommend for conservatives on the small time? And the second thing is, you're a really political person, and a lot of us here are really political. do you ever stop seeing things politically? Like, I went to Busch Gardens with a friend of mine, and the guy at the counter said Merry Christmas, and instead of saying Merry Christmas back, I thought, oh my God, he said Merry Christmas.
Yeah. So I do think that it's important to be able to turn off your brain, and it's something you have to cultivate. Like when you live in the political world all the time, it's very difficult to turn that off for sure, because you start seeing things in terms of that prism, as opposed to just, turn it off. Okay, now we're going to go watch a movie, and I don't care. And it's something that, for your own mental health, I would suggest that you cultivate. I've had to, right? It's something. My wife has been very helpful with this. She takes my phone away and refuses to allow me to use Twitter. So those 45 minutes a day when I'm not tweeting, that's because of my wife stealing the phone. My daughter also does it, by the way. She's been trained by my wife. So my 2.5-year-old runs up and grabs the phone and says, "I have your phone," and runs away. But as far as the fake news thing. The Facebook fake news plan here is really bad. So their plan is they want to have PolitiFact and FactCheck.org and ABC News and WAPO be the fact checkers. And the problem is, historically, those fact checkers have been extraordinarily biased politically. They don't just check a fact, they check the implication that they think people are drawing from the fact, or they just fact check a headline that has a different political angle on the same fact instead of the underlying fact. So we're going to have to look at that very carefully, obviously. If it starts being that headlines that are true, the left just doesn't like, if those headlines are being labeled fake news, then conservatives are going to have no choice but to actually start thinking about how do we build an alternative to Facebook, which is very difficult because Facebook as a platform is something that's grown more powerful as more and more people have joined it. Starting from scratch is really difficult. But that is the trouble with living on platforms created by the left, unfortunately.
Hi. I'm a devout Catholic. Obama's healthcare bills and mandates restricting Catholics in terms of practicing religious freedom, really religious freedom all across the country.
Yes.
Have been really offensive, I would say.
Yeah.
And so, and I was thinking about like the other side of the coin, and so I'm wondering, with regards to religious freedom, what is its boundary? Like, for example, if a religion decided that its followers needed to kill anyone who didn't subscribe to that religion, or beat anyone who didn't subscribe to that religion, what is the line that we
Okay, so
and what document or documents?
So I mean, I have a very libertarian approach to pretty much everything when it comes to government. So my basic rule is you get to swing your fist in the air as much as you want until you hit somebody in the face. So obviously, if a religion is telling people that you should kill other people and people are killing other people, then you have to talk about whether that religion is promoting violence, for example, or whether the adherents of that religion are committing acts of violence. The idea that the government has a right to tell you what to do, though, when you're not violating anybody else's rights, when you're not violating anyone else's sovereignty, that's a different thing. The idea that I get to sit around, that the government should be able to tell a baker that the baker has to provide a cake for a same-sex couple or a same-sex wedding, that's absolute nonsense, because you don't have a right to buy a cake from me. But I think that's true without regard to religion, by the way. I think that I should be able to refuse service to whomever I want. Now, the left has a problem with this, because the left says, all these evil, discriminatory white people will then discriminate against black people. To which my answer is, okay, good, let them do that, the evil, discriminatory white people, and then they'll go out of business. Because they're essentially imposing a self-boycott. Right? They're actually hurting themselves economically in order to promote some idiotic agenda. And by the way, if you think that you can't find a baker across the street who's going to bake the cake for the gay wedding, you're out of your mind. And if you think that you're not going to be able to find a place to rent in the United States that will rent to black people, you're also crazy. The fact is that the reason that the South imposed Jim Crow, like the left, they're such liars when it comes to history. The left suggests that Jim Crow was an extra governmental authority. That's not what Jim Crow was. Jim Crow was a set of laws and regulations that forced businesses not to engage in certain types of commerce with certain types of people. The reason they had to have those laws in place is because businesses would have just catered to black people. Right? When Woolworths was boycotted in 1960, to give a prescient example, Jim Crow was still in place, and Woolworths desegregated because Woolworths said we don't want to pay the economic cost of not serving black people. And that was before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this idea that the government has to go around telling people who they can engage in business with and who they can't engage in business, it's a two-edged sword, and it's fun and games. So the power of government is always like the ring from Lord of the Rings. Everybody wants to wield it, but in the end, anybody who wields it is corrupted by it, and the only way to fight that is to destroy it and throw it into the fiery chasm from whence it came.
Can you point to a document, like part of the Constitution, that
Well, again, it's only superseded because, well, I mean, rights come into conflict sometimes. So, for example, I have freedom of, so the same amendment guarantees two people freedom of religion. What if my freedom of religion suggests that my religion is to violate your freedom of religion? Well, then the principle of freedom of religion no longer exists, right? It's freedom of your religion, not freedom of my religion. So whenever you have two rights that come into conflict, you have to say that whoever is the aggressor against the right is the problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Ben. I really appreciate Daily Wire and everything you do. And
Thank you.
It's more of a religious question, so there's two parts. So, since the role of the Messiah is to help other nations come to know the one true God, and Israel has had the same role. If a large portion of Israel doesn't accept Jesus as the Messiah, why can't God's plan go out to the nations? And also, what are your thoughts on Messianic prophecy and Christianity's claim that it predicted Christ and was fulfilled by the person of Jesus Christ, whose life, death, and resurrection?
Right, so if you want me to talk theology, I mean, it's sort of a different conversation, but the short answer is, as a Jew, I don't believe in the New Testament, right? I mean, that's just the basis of my religion. That's not a rip on anybody who does believe in the New Testament. I think that Christianity is the basis of the greatest country that God ever created. But that doesn't... But the idea, but I mean, if you want me to get into like the ins and outs of reading the Old Testament in Hebrew, I can do it. Right? I mean, I can talk about why I think Isaiah is mistranslated when it talks about, you know, a child will be born unto a virgin. That's not actually the word in Hebrew for virgins, Betula versus Nara. Like, I can get into that stuff, but I don't think people are super interested in that. But let's put it this way. I appreciate that you care so much about my soul that you're reaching out that way. So thank you.
Yes. Okay, so how do you see the future of the conservative movement, or more specifically the Republican Party, going into the next few decades here, considering our generation, at least from what I've seen, has been a lot more libertarian,
Yes.
more Tea Party leaning than I think even the Republican Party 10 years ago.
So I think that there's two ways that the Republican Party can go. One is, are they going to fall to God worship of any particular figure? And the other is, are they actually going to figure out what their set of principles are? And, you know, that's not unique to Trump, by the way. We fought this during Bush also. There are a lot of people who are willing to go along with No Child Left Behind and Medicare Part D. It's not unique. I mean, the idea that it's unique to Trump is not really true. Trump may be a more extreme version of that when you see the polls shifting 56% in favor of approval of Vladimir Putin. It's sort of disturbing. But, you know, but as far as the future of the conservative movement in the Republican Party, I think that where it's going is a sort of conservative libertarian mind meld. And what I mean by that is that conservatives are going to have to acknowledge that a lot of the things they thought government was good for promoting, government just sucks at. Right? And so when we say things like government can promote marriage, no, government really is not capable of promoting marriage. It's been terrible at it. If government would have promoted marriage, we wouldn't have the catastrophic breakdown of marriage that we've had, obviously. So the government should just get out of that business, right? So that's the conservative concession to the libertarians. And what libertarians are going to have to concede and recognize is that you do need a solid civil society in which religion plays an important role outside of government. And so I think if both sides can acknowledge that, then you'll end up in a place where I think a broad majority of Americans actually basically agree with that. I think most Americans actually agree, get out of my business, but I have the stuff I do with my community, and that's my business.
Hi, such a pleasure talking to you. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. As a Zionist and a conservative Jewish American, how do you think the American Jewish community will progress while Donald Trump is in office, and how do you think he will actually impact Israel?
So, I mean, I love the guy he just picked as his ambassador. David Friedman's great. So that's excellent Trump, right? I mean, in good Trump, bad Trump, he's excellent. That's a very good pick by Trump. I don't know what his foreign policy is going to look like, because I don't think anyone can say with real specificity what his foreign policy is going to look like, including Trump. I think that I don't think Trump has a broad foreign policy view. If he does, it tends toward isolationism, and that could variously be an okay thing for Israel or a bad thing for Israel. Like, it's good for Israel in the sense that he's not going to be putting tons of pressure on the Jews in order to make a deal with terrorists. On the other hand, it could also be him saying, okay, well, everybody's left to their own devices. This Iran deal is already in place. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. Let Putin have leadership in Syria. Who cares? Right? You could see that happening too. So, so there's some good stuff that can happen, some bad stuff that can happen. As far as the American Jewish community, I think that the American Jewish community, as I've said before, the reason they vote left is because most American Jews don't really care very much about Judaism. Right? They're ethnic Jews. They go to synagogue like once a year on Yom Kippur and break for lunch. And then just statistically speaking, we're the most atheistic religious community in America. Only 41% of Jews say they believe in God. Right? So the reason that you have this political breakdown, and as you get more observant on the Jewish scale, you tend to get more Republican on the Jewish scale. What you're going to see from Trump and you have seen it, is people looking for an excuse to ignore the fact that the Democratic Party has moved radically anti-Israel in recent years with people like Keith Ellison. And so there are a lot of Jews who don't really care so much about the principles, but care more about the aesthetics, who say things like, look at Donald Trump and his association with Bannon and the alt-right, and so that's an excuse for me not to support Donald Trump, right?
Do you think that the current Jewish agencies are effectively working to combat these problems within the community?
No, of course not. I think the current Jewish agencies are largely a flaming garbage heap. I mean, I think that they're partisan hacks too. I mean, I've been very critical of AIPAC, for example. I think AIPAC should have been doing much more during the Iran deal, and they didn't because the heads of AIPAC are all Democrats. I think that you've seen that from Hillel, which is a campus organization that has attempted to embrace J Street, which is a wildly anti-Israel organization. So no, they're not doing enough.
Hi, Ben.
Howdy.
You're one of my favorites. I'm really excited to talk to you. Love your show. You're great. I come from Metro Detroit, so the auto industry is like really big in my community. And as a free market capitalist, I believe in free trade. And so, like, even from people like on the right and the left, like, I get a lot of hate saying that we should, like, the companies should have the right to choose where they want to do their business. I was wondering how to combat these without being called like an anti-American or be looked at as someone who hates like the country.
Okay, so first of all, statistically speaking, the vast majority of manufacturing jobs that have been lost due to automation. They've not been lost due to outsourcing. So 85% of all jobs that have been lost in the manufacturing sector have been lost due to automation. In fact, people keep saying we're outsourcing to places like China. China is losing manufacturing jobs because they're automating too. So, I mean, there's no way to stop people from saying stupid things like it's anti-American to say that Americans ought to have a choice with whom they trade. But just statistically speaking, the idea that tariffs are going to bring back American jobs, you can bring back jobs to a particular industry, but you have to punish the rest of the country in order to do that. You have to indirectly tax me by forcing me to pay more for a car in order to keep somebody's job in Detroit. And no. It's I don't think that welfare is an appropriate form of redistribution when we're talking about the government taking my money and then giving it to someone else. And I don't think it's an appropriate form of redistribution when you're imposing a government tariff from above that is requiring me to pay more for a product so that the government can basically make sure that this person in another sector gets that money. I don't see why the Detroit auto worker is any better than the Seattle tech worker. Like, why? That seems discriminatory to me. And tariffs are inherently discriminatory. So I know we're all supposed to care more about manufacturing, and manufacturing is all real special and everything. And manufacturing is great for what manufacturing is good for. But the fact is that manufacturing in future, in coming years, is going to be largely automated. Now, this is the reason I'm not a politician, because I don't lie to people. So I could also go around to... the easiest thing in the world is to go around to depressed areas and say, I'm going to bring your job back, and it's not going to cost anybody anything. And the only reason that people are outsourcing is because they hate you. Right? The real reason Carrier is moving its jobs down to Mexico is because they hate their workers in Indiana. It's a crock of crap. It's not true in the slightest. And it's actually telling people a lie about society it's allowing people into this victim mentality that shouldn't be expanding, it should be contracting. It's one of the things to which I object about what Trump has done with his economic plan. And so what I would love to see, and first of all, you want to restore manufacturing to the United States, do the other stuff that Trump talks about, right? Get rid of the regulations, lower the taxes, make it easier to employ people. What Trump is talking about right now with tariffs, where he's saying, I'm going to raise tariffs on companies that outsource jobs, it's economically idiotic. Okay, he's talking about you're going to so if you're a company in Indiana, and you form in Indiana, and you're going to take some jobs and move them down to Mexico, now he's going to tax your product at 35%. Say you're a new startup. Do you start up in the United States, or do you start up on a foreign soil? You start up on a foreign soil, or he's going to have to threaten 35% tariffs on everyone, which means that all of your prices go up by 35% on everything, right? Which he's obviously not going to do. Or let's say that you're based in the United States. Instead of you hiring people, you're going to hire people really slowly, because if you fire somebody and outsource it, then he punishes you. So instead, you just don't hire anybody, right? It doesn't make any economic sense, but it makes for really, really good populist demagoguery, and that's really what that is. Yes.
Very few journalists are aware of it. The Secretary of State is primarily a CEO. The Department of State is a vast aggregation of entities and obscurities and what have you. I'm the Foreign Service Office. And I think that the selection of a CEO-type leader instead of a
Well, obviously I wouldn't want Hillary at the head of the State Department.
She lost $6 or $7 billion.
Yeah, she's a disaster. And I'm not arguing against the presence of a CEO. I'm arguing against the presence of this CEO.
But the policy, the foreign policy in the Trump Department of State is more likely to come from Ambassador Bolton as the deputy.
Well, first he has to appoint Ambassador Bolton. He's also talking about Richard Haas, which is a very different thing.
I was unaware of that. But the deputy secretary is a better figure for the enunciation of policy.
So let me put it this way. If that ends up being true, I'll be happy to praise it. Right now, all I can gauge is the person he picked. The person he picked does not reflect a foreign policy that I think is beneficial for the United States. So again, I don't have a problem with the CEO at all. I do think, by the way, that Bolton, the Secretary of State, in some ways would have been better just because he knows where all the bodies are buried at the State Department and he'd know who to cut. Right? See, Tillerson's coming into an organization he knows nothing about, really, and then he's supposed to know how to dismantle this organization. I like the idea of somebody coming in. Like, my favorite thing is, like, Perry for Department of Energy is great because he's going to come in and fire everybody. Right? I'd love... If Tillerson pledges that he's going to come in and fire the entire State Department and then hand over policy to John Bolton, I'm right with you. Sorry.
The problem with the Department of State since the era of John Foster Dulles is that predominantly secretaries of state have sat themselves in aircraft seats and flown all over the world.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's 100% true. And again, we'll see what the record is when the record actually becomes apparent. I can only judge based on the evidence in front of me. So this is my rule. I say things based on the evidence in front of me. If the evidence changes, so can my opinion.
So is it typically saying that like a Secretary of State generally is a CEO, or is it like just a one-person thing?
I'm sorry?
Is he saying that generally speaking, when you elect a department of when you elect the Secretary of State, is he saying that they're generally CEOs?
No. He's making the argument that the requirements for the Secretary of State job match up well with the requirements for a CEO because you're going to run a department, basically.
Hey, my name is Adam. I'm a Jewish student at the University of Oregon. I really appreciate your work. I am genuinely fearful for the conservatives movement with a strongman like Trump in office, God Emperor Trump as. And I'm genuinely fearful because things such as carrier, the federal mandate of gay marriage across all 50 states. He's kind of insinuated that he wouldn't do anything about it. If we continue to move in this direction, do you think that we need a third party, or what is the solution?
Well, I think that the party mechanism is not the real issue. The real issue is that the American people are so frustrated with the current government and the system, and this is true on all sides, and this is what's scary, that they're basically willing to hand power over to whoever they think is going to do stuff for them. Okay, the idea, I get to break the system to do stuff for you, is the end of republicanism. It is. And I mean small r republicanism, not big R republicanism. And that's been true on all sides, and it's been a long time coming. I mean, the undermining of the checks and balances of government's been going on for well over 100 years now. And so the left is finally going, oh my God, look at Trump. He could be this strong man. It's like, well, yeah, you just elected one for 2 terms, right? So the fact is that when it comes to the demise of democracy and small r republicanism, that's the process that takes place over a long period of time. It's not something where there's one election and boom, it's over. Like what people miss about, you see Paul Krugman today comparing America to Nazi Germany, right? And but the fact is that dictatorship usually pre-exists the dictator who comes to power. So the fact is that if you look to pre-Nazi Germany, there was essentially a dictatorship by the government of Germany before Hitler comes to power, and then Hitler comes to power and consolidates it just a little bit more, not even that much more. He consolidates it like a little bit more, and then he does what he wants to do, but it takes him 10 years to get there even then, right? He's elected in 1933. He only starts the Holocaust. The Wannsee Conference only takes place in 1943. So the real problem here is the mentality among Americans that as Chris Rock put it, the president is our dad, or as other people on our side of the aisle have put it, Donald Trump is daddy, right? That mentality is a disaster for America. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. The president of the United States is a glorified DMV worker, and it is his job to do what he's supposed to do under the Constitution. Last question, because I have to run to the airport. Yes.
Movement.
Yes.
I wanted to know what your thoughts were on how to combat those, because my grandfather was
I mean, I think that standing up to them is the best way to do it. And I don't think that means that, you know, look, when people say things like Blue Lives Matter and then Black Lives Matter people get angry, that's good press. I mean, that's good optics. If you're talking about how you win on campus, when you say Blue Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter people get all angry, that's a better tack than saying Black lives don't matter. Right? No one actually believes that. So, look, the Black Lives Matter movement is a lying movement. They lie. I mean, their whole premise for being is that cops are targeting black people because they're black, and that's just not true. And the best way to do that, I mean, you should bring in speakers who can debunk that. Heather McDonald is great with this. You should bring in cops to talk to the community and explain what it's like to actually police, because most of these people have no clue. But the automatic credibility that the left grants people because of skin color is very difficult to overcome unless you're willing to say, look, you're not a better person because of the color of your skin, and you're not a worse person because of the color of your skin. You're a better person or a worse person because of what you do. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.